Listeners, we are actually starting this episode a little differently than we normally do since we taped this episode, which I believe was back in May, correct, Emily?
Yes, it was May of 2023.
Since then, we have lost one of our very esteemed members of the FTT alum, Alan Arkin.
Yes,
And we wanted to take a few minutes. I don't think it can go without saying and giving some respect to this great actor that we lost and that we really miss.
indeed. He, of course, played Sir Beau in the episode that we're going to be reviewing tonight. And he was an Academy Award winner. He was, I believe, a Tony Award winner and nominated for several Emmys and just a very gifted performer. And we wanted to just take a second and pay tribute to him. So, Eric, what are your memories of Alan Arkin?
I would say that I really saw him again in something not until I got a little bit older, which was Little Miss Sunshine. I was
Yes.
just fresh out of high school. I remember when that came out, 2006, and that was the role that he finally won his Oscar for. And he played that really disgruntled, really funny, curmudgeon grandfather in that movie. And I just loved his role in that. And I was automatically like, oh my God, that's Beau from The Emperor's New Clothes. And then, of course, later, his later project, The Kominsky Method that he did with Michael Douglas, I loved him in that. So he
Oh,
did a great job in that.
I was more familiar with his early work. I think it's mentioned in our episode, but my favorite role of his was in Wait Until Dark with Audrey Hepburn, where he played the villain. And it took me several years to realize that that was Sir Beau, because Sir Beau is not supposed to be a villain. It messed with my head a little bit, but he was truly a very, very gifted entertainer. And we were truly sorry to hear about his passing this past June.
Yes, and we will really miss him. And Emily and I did actually see a film of his together. We saw him in the live action remake of Dumbo.
Yes, we did. And we both really enjoyed that.
So it's good to see that his performances will live on. And we just figured we'd pay tribute because we do mention him quite a bit in this episode. Obviously, he's one of the main leads in the episode. And we definitely had to pay tribute to this great actor that has recently passed. And without further ado,
The Emperor's New Clothes. Welcome to tonight's tale, a fairy tale theater podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Emily from Atlanta, Georgia, and I am joined by Eric.
my name is Eric. I'm from New York.
And we are going through every episode in alphabetical order. Tonight's tale, we are going through The Emperor's New Clothes.
Episode 22, season 4, episode 7, and it aired on October 5th, 1985.
What is the first thing that springs to mind when you think about this episode, Eric?
What stands out always for me is Art Carney and Alan Arkin because I was always a big fan of theirs growing up.
Really?
Well, not growing up, but as I got older. And I think now that I'm older, I think I appreciate that they were in this episode a lot more because, of course, Art Carney, we don't have anymore, RIP. And they were probably the shining point of the episode, having their comedic duo at the forefront, I think.
I will agree, but I will also add to that list the great Dick Shawn, who we also don't have anymore. Rest in peace. He was a great comedian. Of course, he plays the Emperor. I was not familiar with his work as a kid, but like you said, as I got older, I really had more of an appreciation of who he was. I agree with you. The first thing that comes to my mind is the cast. Art Carney. I remember The Honeymooners. Alan Arkin, great film career. Dick Shawn. And I remembered this right off the top of my head. We've got James Bond himself doing the narration. We've got Timothy Dalton.
Yeah, so cool. And I do agree with you. Dick Shawn, he just hams it up. He's awesome in this. He really is. And that's probably where I was introduced. I mean, with most things with fairy tale theater, I was introduced to most people when I was watching this at a very, very young age. I probably started watching fairy tale theater when I was like 4 or 5. So,
Same, if not younger.
so that's where I implanted those images and ideas of people that I would come to later see in movies. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, that's so and so. That's the emperor. That's,
Exactly. Exactly. I'm the same way. I grew up going, Dick Shawn. Oh, he's funny. Oh, he was the emperor. Alan Arkin. Oh, he was spooky and Wait Until Dark. Now, why do I know him? Oh, that's right. He was Sir Bob. That's the way we grew up. We knew them in fairy tale theater first. The other thing that really comes to mind quickly when I think about this episode is, of course, the original fairy tale, one of Hans Christian Andersen's most famous tales. And it's a pretty short one. I read it myself when I was a kid. I haven't reread it recently, but I believe you have.
yes, I have. I wouldn't so much call it a fairy tale. I would more call it a parable of sorts.
Oh, that's perfect.
It's very small, it's very short, and it delivers a message.
It's kind of entered our lexicon now where people say the emperor has new clothes. Parable is more appropriate than fairy tale. I completely agree with you.
I agree. It's not really like Hans Christian Andersen's, it's not like his other stories because there's no fantastical elements to it. Pretty much takes place in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no magic really to speak of. And it's very different than the other stories. There's no romance, although I'm familiar with the Cat and Movie Tale version where they tried to insert a romance in there just to have one.
Awkwardly.
Very, very weird and awkward. But
yeah.
No, this and the fairy tale theater version did, comparing to the story, they followed the story pretty closely. There's some embellishments that we'll discuss later on, but you needed to embellish a little bit. You needed to stretch it to a 50-minute show. You couldn't just have a 30-minute show. You needed to stretch it to almost an hour, and that's what they needed to do. They needed to add some embellishments and some flourishments. And I think the changes they made to it actually didn't seem like add-ons. They actually worked. It wasn't like we're just throwing stuff in here and, like I said, kind of moving tales, making a relationship out of nowhere, a romance. It wasn't anything of that sort. It worked. It didn't seem forced. It didn't seem superficial. It seemed authentic to the story. It didn't seem like it was trying too hard to stretch it out and make it a long story, which I've seen with other stories.
Oh, definitely. And I think Shelley probably ran into some trouble with this, especially I'm half Danish. I'm, of course, very loyal to Hans Christian Andersen. My father was born in the same town as him randomly. But some of his stories, like the Snow Queen, could go on. Calling the Snow Queen a fairy tale is kind of absurd to me. That's a short novel. And then Princess and the Pea is like a page. His stories could go in either direction, but this was the 1980s Showtime. Everything had to be condensed to a 50-minute show. So sometimes they had to really stretch to add, and sometimes they had to cut a lot. We start with our beautiful Shelley doing her introduction.
Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. Welcome to Fairy Tale Theater. We all enjoy dressing up, but tonight's tale is about a man whose passion for apparel becomes an obsession, and how he learns a lesson in humility at the hands of two scroungy schemers, the Emperor's new clothes.
And this is where we see that they are setting the costumes and sets based on the court of, I think it's Louis XV of France. So in the 1700s, which I think was a beautiful artistic direction. It worked for me. How'd you feel about it?
It was very much giving me like that type of vibe, Paris of Versailles, Marie Antoinette. And I think it was a very smart choice because you're making a point and a critique of monarchy and their rule over society and how they really don't care about their people and they care about the pomp and circumstance and the fashion and the riches and their beautiful life, which was very much what happened with Marie Antoinette and King Louis.